He is the Secretary General of the Justice Department. All available information were made available by Mrs. van der Plas and myself at the National Investigation Union. We even have one of the Turkish victims travel to the Netherlands to make a statement. In addition, we also had an important witness come from Turkey to the Netherlands to speak with the National Investigation Union. The result was, as the leader of this National Investigation Unit told us, that there will be no criminal investigation. The National Investigation Union had convened itself to also called a fact collection, and this had no authority to do a proper investigation. Again, I missed opportunity to fully investigation all allegations in Turkey and take testimony from the important witness did not happen. In the past years, I have done extensive research regarding more possible child abuse victims in high police and judicial officials in the Netherlands. From this research, it is being crystal clear to me that there is and has been abuse of minors by high police justice officials, and that they all effort to criminal investigations and prosecute these cases have been blocked and covered up. During my investigation, I came in contact with one of the victims who is here today and has told his story. After serious reflections, I have come to the conclusion that the Dutch government does not want and will not investigate this very sensitive issue of manipulating wiretaps under which someone is wrongfully serving life sentences, and about the young boys and the one of the highest official of the Justice Department. It's also my conclusion that after many years of research by myself, the theory of the law firm Bakker Schut van der Plas is correct. Their client, Mr. Hussein Bijbezien, was framed, and several of Mr. van der Plas' other clients were abused by the Justice Department Secretary General, Mr. Joris Demming, when they were a minor. My confidence that the Dutch government will ever carry out a fair, independent investigation in these two issues is completely gone. I hope that you can, or the United States can help us in resolving this matter through diplomatic or severe methods in this very sensitive issue. What I would like to ask the Commission is threefold. First, pressure the Turkish authorities to release all the information about blackmailing. Second, pressure the Turkish authorities to release the travel dates of Demming during the 90s. This will be resolve the matter once and for all. And third, pressure the Turkish authorities to release the video made of Demming raping one of the Turkish boys. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that, again, very extensive, and you set out to disprove and came to an opposite conclusion. That's quite remarkable. I'd like to now show a very brief video, and then we'll go to our fourth and final witness, and that is a video of police officer Kurt Mutz, who allegedly offered Demek security in Turkey and kidnapped boys for him for abuse, and also Mustafa, who's identifying Demek, and we'll now watch that video.
Prosecute this case.
İstanbul'da, İstanbul'da
saw the picture, it was very ugly, and he told me this was the person directing.
Okay, we'll now go to our fourth very distinguished witness, Ms. Vardaman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Congressman Cohen, and to the Helsinki Commission and the Victims' Rights Caucus for keeping the spotlight on this critical issue of child sex trafficking. The victimization endured by this man as a child is heartbreaking. Shared Hope International has been working to develop responses to child sex trafficking, restore victims, and prevent victimization for 14 years. In 2006 to 2007, under a grant from the U.S. Department of State Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons, Shared Hope researched sex trafficking markets in 4 countries. The Netherlands was one of those countries. The goal of that research was to identify commonalities that could refocus our efforts to fight trafficking on an issue basis as opposed to a regional basis. Well, the finding was the commonality is and was and continues to be demand. The second commonality is that exploitation of children through sex trafficking is occurring around the world, and the Netherlands was no exception. The exploitation includes giving anything of value in exchange for pornography, sexual performance, or prostitution. All 3 occur in nearly every country around the globe. Child sex trafficking and child sex tourism are happening in all parts of our world. And the reason is that demand exists for commercial sexual exploitation of children. Focusing on the findings in the Netherlands illustrates the scope of the problem. Legalized prostitution led to increased demand, and consequently a need for more supply. But there are a limited number of adults willing to enter the prostitution, quote, profession. And the deficiency is filled with trafficking victims. The ban on brothels was lifted in 2000 in the Netherlands. And just a few years later, the Amsterdam City Council recognized the dangers of trafficking, deciding to close 100 of the 350 prostitution windows in the red light district. Amsterdam's mayor stated, "Almost 5 years after the lifting of the brothel ban, we have to acknowledge that the aims of that law have not been reached. Lately, we've received more and more signals that abuse still continues. The police admit we are in the midst of modern slavery." In 2003, in the Netherlands, there were 257 registered victims of human trafficking. A 2004 media piece reported that the Amsterdam City Council was going to close the street prostitution zones. It also reported a public opinion poll taken on the issue of the resignation of one of the council members because he had been found to have purchased prostitution in that same street zone. 73% of the citizens believed that public officials should not be stigmatized for buying prostitution. And 63% believed the council members' actions were a private matter and certainly not the grounds for resignation. This is what we call a culture of tolerance. And we find that where it exists, it makes the job of fighting trafficking that much harder. In 2004, about 8,000 prostitutes worked in Amsterdam alone, and some 2/3 of those were of foreign origin. In 2005, Dutch police received more than 600 reports of women who may have been forced into prostitution, and 400 women contacted anti-trafficking organizations for assistance. In 2007, there were 343 registered victims of sex trafficking. 25% of those were under 18 years old. At the time of our research in 2006 and 2007, there was reportedly no police presence between 12 a.m. and 6 a.m. in the official red light district in Amsterdam, a time which one trafficking victim who suffered her experiences there called, quote, a black market of prostitution when children became readily available. Only 5 to 6 police officers worked in the entire red light district at that time. There was no capacity for investigating the illegal trafficking occurring. This was an iceberg with legal prostitution at the top, masking the vast illegal activity beneath. The Dutch Criminal Code in 2005 extended jurisdiction to reach citizens committing child sex tourism. That is sexual exploitation of a child outside the Netherlands. But in the Netherlands, there continued to be an increasing amount of pimping, organized crime, and exploitation of children. In a 2005 news report, a former vice officer in the red light district reported that the 2 primary groups of pimps working in that red light district were called, quote, lover boys and, quote, the Turks. He reported that law enforcement officers had 3 months to complete investigations, a wholly insufficient amount of time for these complicated crimes. Shared Hope's partner, Scarlet Cord, worked in the red light district in Amsterdam, doing outreach and services to trafficking victims. They identified the lover boy problem early on and began to put programs into schools to educate and to prevent the recruitment of these mostly teenage victims. The lover boy pimping method is very similar to modern trafficking in the U.S., relying on emotional bondage rather than physical force to maintain control over their young victims. In our research in the Netherlands, victims reported also that, quote, magic was used to entice them. But this is not limited to the Netherlands, and it's certainly not limited to any one country. A weak link in the global dragnet and safety net will prevent us from protecting the victims of child sex trafficking. As Congressman Smith noted at the start of this briefing, traffickers rely on the ability to frighten children and keep them quiet. And it's imperative that the justice system be ready now to listen to allegations and to thoroughly investigate them. Shared Hope has highlighted some promising practices through our research here in the United States in the last 5 years. Promising practices to develop proper responses to child sex trafficking. Some of these are happening in other countries already, and all of them are transferable to any country willing to take them on. First, the presence of school resource officers within schools to help build trust between law enforcement and children undermines the traffickers' ability to scare their victims into distrusting law enforcement. Education at all levels of the justice system, from investigation to trial, will lead to more identifications of child sex trafficking victimization and better responses. Above all, victim-centered approaches to interviewing and investigation are critical to a child's confidence to disclose their victimization. A few examples exist that are worthy of highlighting. The Dallas Police Department has a high-risk victims unit in which the process is to flag a file of a child who is a repeat runaway and direct that file straight to this high-risk victims unit where there are child forensic interviewers ready to investigate with proper child approaches. Gang units like the Fairfax County Gang Unit in Northern Virginia are being trained in sex trafficking identification and victim interviewing that can separate the victim from the influence and gag control of the gang. Human trafficking task forces across the U.S. and in other countries bring together service providers and law enforcement to ensure victims are supported and encouraged to seek justice. And lastly, victim witness coordinators in the majority of federal law enforcement offices across the country ensure the victim is supported through the investigation and trial process. Shared Hope International has developed the Protected Innocence Challenge, which, though domestic, has relevance for the world. It includes a framework of laws for effective responses to child sex trafficking. The framework credits those states that have laws in place providing for victim protections and support through the investigation and trial process. Currently, 34 states in the United States currently have some protection, and all are being encouraged to enact more laws which will ensure that more victims are heard. And finally, as I stated several times throughout, attacking demand. Demand is the root of the problem, and we've heard about the exploitation today of children firsthand from the people representing them, and if we could focus some of that effort on demand, maybe this wouldn't have occurred in the first place. Resources and prioritization of fighting demand are critical and lead to corroboration of a victim's complaint, less reliance on victim testimony, and hopefully, and ultimately, a reduction in the number of children exploited. Child sex trafficking is a threat to our society's health, undoubtedly, and it's truly a national and international security threat as well. It allows organized crime to prey on the most vulnerable until we all, as a global community and individually within our nations, our state, our cities, get serious about stopping demand. This fight has no end. Thank you for continuing to keep this issue at the forefront.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the outstanding work Shared Hope International has done and continues to do. I noted in reading your, Mr. Cohen, do you have any questions? Thank you so much. I noted in your report, you point out that the women in this area, talking about one of the red light districts, are mostly Latin and South American, from Colombia, Cuba, Brazil, and Venezuela. I was in Brasilia on a trip years ago to talk about an effort to get the Brazilians to pass a comprehensive strategy on combating sex trafficking, to protect their own children because child sex tourism is so huge there. I met with parliamentarians in Brasilia for several days, but we made a one-day trip to Rio de Janeiro and went to a shelter. And while I was at the shelter, there was a woman from Brazil who had just been rescued with tears pouring from her eyes, rescued a couple of days earlier, but as she told her story, she was en route to Amsterdam. And I have raised this issue myself with the Dutch as head of delegation for the United States Parliamentary Assembly, as chairman of this commission, and as you point out in your report, when you get 2/3 or more, some put it as high as 80% or higher, of the women being foreign, even the indigenous Dutch women, it is highly suspect as to at what level of coercion have they been brought there. But when so many people from other countries are present, it begs the question about and there have been the rapporteur's report in previous years that strongly suggest that there are levels, and I would suggest high degrees of levels of force, fraud, and coercion involved. And I saw it myself with the one rescued woman who was in a shelter in Rio de Janeiro who was saved from that nightmare of being sent as a slave to Amsterdam. I would like to ask, if you could, Ms. Martevin, Ms. Vanderplas, in her statement, in one of her two asks was that Holland be removed from Tier 1. Your thoughts on that?
Still on. I think that the assessment of tier placement is a complicated one, and I would defer. What I would say, though, is that it is clear that efforts are in place in the Netherlands and in the United States and in other Tier 1 countries that do reflect an intention to address trafficking. Whether those efforts are reaching their goal, I think, is a different question.
Let me ask Mr. B, if he could. You mentioned that you were not allowed to leave Amsterdam by your pimp. What would have happened had you left Amsterdam? Do you know of anybody who escaped, and what happened to them?
Can you say it
yes,
again?
What would have happened had you been able to leave Amsterdam after your exploitation? Do you know of any others who did?
I would have been punished.
How? Beatings?
Sorry?
You would have been beaten, or?
Yeah. beaten or worse.
Do you know anybody who was maltreated, who tried to escape?
No, I can only speak for my own.
In your presentation, you stated that various high-ranking Dutch officials were part of a pedophile ring contained in Professor Van Roon's Rolodex, and that you made extensive reports to the police during the investigation. Were there any law enforcement officials suspected in the investigation or other officials that might have been in place to stop that investigation?
Yes.
Was your pimp or anyone else ever charged as part of that investigation?
I don't know.
You don't know, okay. Your presentation indicates that you were prostituted at the festival bar in Amsterdam along with other boys. Can you tell us what has happened to the festival bar after your police report? Was it shut down? And were the boys rescued?
The festival bar has changed the name, and there are still boys working.
Notwithstanding your complaint. Could you tell us what the name of it is now? Do you know?
No, I don't know the name, sorry.
You are obviously being, we are seeking to hide your identity to the greatest extent possible. Are you fearful of any retaliation because you have presented testimony here before the Helsinki Commission?
I don't know what happened with me if I go back to the Netherlands, if I arrive at the airport. I talked about it with my attorney.
Thank you, Mr. B. Ms. Vanderplas, if I could ask you, in your presentation, you mentioned a previous case, of course, the Rolodex case, that you believe shows a pattern of investigations being shut down by Mr. Demek. You mentioned that, quote, according to the leading investigators in the case, as soon as Demek became a person of interest in this matter, the investigation was shut down, and that the sting operation to catch the man who identified Mr. B was compromised. This information came from leading investigators in the case, did it? And
Yes.
how many investigators on the case were willing to speak with you about this?
One investigator visited my office and told me his whole story, and he told me this. He was in the preliminary investigation, and he knew very well that this Mr. Demek was one of the suspects. And he said we had some unofficial wiretapping, and we heard all the people speaking, but at the moment we started the official investigation, it was, all the communication was closed down. So it couldn't be different than there was a leak. And also he said, when we went to this middleman, this Mr. Van Roon, he was waiting for us. He was waiting for us, and his whole house was clean. So it was very clear. He told us, oh, there you are. We are waiting you. And he also told me that the victim who is now testifying to you gave him very reliable information at the time that he found back when he did his searches. And a question you asked the victim, I can tell you that in that case, one pimp was convicted, not very large sentence. One of it was conditional, and the condition was for a part of the prison sentence he could work in a kind of farm where children came. So the policeman who told me that was still so angry. The policemen who worked on that case are really frustrated. And I also heard, but that was through a middleman, a journalist who told me that the chief of the investigation team, a man who really believed in God and in good life, he told the journalist, I can't speak. I go every Sunday to the church to sing it away from me. That's what policemen say. And I know that Mr. Langendoen next to me spoke even to other investigators who of that team at that time who confirmed exact that information, isn't it? Yeah.
You mentioned that the current State Secretary of Justice, Fred Teven, is that how you say it? Teven, stated under oath in 2007 that high-ranking Dutch officials in the Rolodex case were never prosecuted because the investigation was blocked. Was there an investigation into Mr. Teven's allegation that the investigation was blocked, and if so, what was the outcome? Did anybody look into why it was blocked?
No, nobody ever looked in. It's also this case was kept silent. And it was very special that our State Secretary of Justice, Mr. Teven, brought that under oath in a complete different case. He said this was what happened. And what's also interesting that in 1999, Mr. Teven, when he was still intelligence prosecutor, he was prosecutor in that case, he gave an interview to a magazine for lawyers. And he said there, it's my knowledge as prosecutor of intelligence cases that it's known to me, the information I gathered, that criminal organizations in the Netherlands have influence on politicians and even on judges. So when you hear that, it's terrifying. He then was still prosecutor. But the problem is, since Mr. Teven is Secretary of State, we don't hear him anymore. So what happened, I asked Dan? Because this is what he said, and that's published. We even can show you if you would like. He said that then, that he has information, because when you see, when this happened in Turkey, that foreign intelligence agencies have influence, can blackmail our government, and that's terrifying. But not only them. When criminal organizations deliver kits to people in so high ranking inside the government and prosecution office and justice system, then those criminal organizations also have a mean to blackmail those people. And that's going on for a long time when this already happened in the 90s. And even our state secretary told that to a judge, told that in public, and nothing happened.
The situation with Mr. Babason, and maybe Klaus, you might want to speak to this as well. All of us are well aware of the intensity of the feelings of Turks for Kurds and vice versa.
Yeah.
I'll never forget after the first Persian Gulf War when Kurds had made their way to the border. I went over there while it was still a very volatile situation and saw as these poor people were on the border being held by our special forces and others to simply survive.
Yes.
There were the Turks barely allowed them to be across the border.
That was the...
And so my point is, you know, the backdrop of that issue and, you know, the quid pro quo, perhaps allegation that led to the blackmailing and the situation.
That's very clear because Mr. Deming was member of this EU KFOR committee,
right,
and he was specially responsible for the Kurdish-Turkish conflict. So he had this direct connection with the Turks. And this Mr. Babasin, this Turkish activist, was busy to let the Kurds have a better life. And some of them who couldn't have that, to run away from there. So in that way, they were kind of opponents. And that's why the Turkish government at the time said, we see this Babasin as a real main object. We want to silence him. And you have to help us because we caught you with those kids. And that's also what Mr. Langedoen heard in Turkey. But this whole political thing behind it is very clear. And then it's so strange that Mr. Deming said, I didn't visit Turkey since '87. He was the main person in the Netherlands with this, who was dealing with this Kurdish-Turkish conflict. And had
I think your point that an ambassador to another country would hardly stay in Washington. They would be traveling in and back and forth, would be staying there, of course. But in this case, when that's your duties, it would be a dereliction of those duties not to be traveling to Turkey. I think that was a very important internal strength to your argument. Yeah. Can you give any indication as to why the current Turkish leadership, when these Turkish boys were so allegedly abused and exploited and raped, wouldn't find it in their own interest to protect a Turkish citizen and not want to say whatever happened before, so be it, but not so be it. Whatever happened before, wherever that goes, we want to protect our own children and now young adults.
Yes, you could say so, but at that moment, the Turkish government, that was not the nowadays government, but was focusing on this Babasin. They wanted
that government, but this government it seems to
Yes.
me, and the Turkish
This-
government
this-
now
yeah.
more and more has spoken out against combating human trafficking, and this is the case of their own kids.
And that's why they gave Mr. Langedoen so much information. So we all our sources are from Turkey, official sources, other sources, isn't it, Mr. That's why they want to help us, but they, in the same time, they are forced by diplomatic pressure not to give everything, just to give pieces. That's why we are hanging in between for so many years already. Yeah.
Now, the major daily that may very shortly, if you want to speak to that, Klaus? Okay. The major daily or the major newspaper, will this be a breakthrough in terms of finally
Telegraph.
bringing some light and scrutiny to the issue?
That will come, yes, because that is going to speak about, by the way, also investigations Mr. Langedoen did, and there are new Dutch victims who spoke about what happened to them. And that's coming very soon, huh? Isn't it? Yeah.
I'd just ask you, if I could, Ms. van der Plas, you talked about Mustafa. You mentioned that, because I have met with the ambassador of the Netherlands to the United States. I do believe in hearing from all sides and doing my due diligence. Matter of fact, he did mention in his letter the Tier 1 status as if that somehow exonerated a country, and that would apply to any country. That may show a good trend, but if there are individual cases that need to be looked into, they need to be. But that said, that says nothing about this case. You talked about Mustafa. He did not feel safe in traveling to the Netherlands. You mentioned contra-actions, I think was the phrase you used.
Contra-actions was the Rolodex case.
Okay.
But the contra-actions in...
Okay,
yeah.
with Mustafa, it was with safety. He wanted a guarantee of safety, and he also wanted a lawyer present.
Yes, that's what I wrote to the prosecutor. And then the
Why wouldn't the lawyer be allowed to be present with someone who wants to come forward like that? That's
yes.
baffling.
When I asked the prosecutor, and I have it all in correspondence available, I said because of the threats the boy had, I would like to be present, or his Turkish lawyer, and we want security, and because he is giving a statement against the highest man at the Ministry of Justice, and for this kid, as a Turkish citizen, he knows those people have power. And then he wrote back, Mrs. van der Plas, dit is Nederland. That means this is the Netherlands. So, no. And I couldn't guarantee my client full safety when he came, so the kid was terrified, really scared to death. Yeah.
With regards to the Turkish prosecution office in Diyarbakir, you said they now have an active investigation against Mr. Demek, and two of the individuals worked with Turkey. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? How long has that been going on?
This is very recently started, somewhere this spring, because the Turkish authorities want something and then all the time delay, and that's why I'm waiting now with this appeal that I get the information from them. But I know that exactly last week they made some movement, and they're going to listen to some witnesses. So there is now some progress in it, and I think when from United States side there is support for what they're going to do in this respect, that would help them really.
Let me ask you, have you been threatened? Have you personally been threatened yourself at all?
No, but I don't even see it where I'm not, how do you call it, available for that or open for that? Yeah.
Let me ask you one final question. You mentioned that a current member of the Turkish State Security Council, Mr. Salibi,
yes,
of the military wing of the Turkish intelligence service, sent to the Netherlands a list of the many visits he believed Mr. Demek made to Turkey between 1995 and 2003. However, the Netherlands has dismissed the report, never contacted the author, who remains a special security advisor for, among other things, the Turkish Minister of the Interior. Could you speak further on that? Why would such information be shelved or refused to be acted upon, or is it being acted upon in any way? And did this Mr. Salibi run a risk in providing that information himself?
Mr. Salibi made this report.
Because again, in my conversations with the Dutch, they say that he just wasn't there, and that exonerates him, And as you have pointed out, and others have pointed out, he came under aliases, he came other ways.
I made some attachments for your commission. His EC report is in there, and page 23 gives the dates that, he was the first one to reveal the dates that Deming entered Turkey in the 90s, and how everything happened. But I also attached his letter to the Dutch authorities, this independent commission Mr. Langedoen spoke about, and he offered in that, he said who he was, and he offered to give all the information. But nobody ever asked him to do so and to give it. So what we gave, it was ignored. It was ignored, and we give that to you. So what he said, and I was visiting Mr. Celebi even with Mr. Langedoen, and we discussed his report. We have photos of that. Yeah. And we have also, he gave us also a photo showing, look, I write this letter that I was a special advisor of the Minister of Interior in Turkey at that time, but here, look me on the airport with this actually second person in the AK party. So this is really someone not to ignore, but the Dutch just didn't even think about it. When I would have been Ministry of Justice in the Netherlands, I'm not, I should have said, okay, the first thing I do is transparently, openly ask the Turkish government what is about this report. They never did, just ignored.
Is it a cover-up? Is it a cover-up?
What a cover-up? You mean that they don't do anything?
Right.
What we see all the time in this case, whatever we bring in fact, silence is after that. We are ignored.
Mr. Langedoen, let me ask you a question. You indicate that after years in the criminal justice system in the Netherlands, you were very surprised by the facts presented to you by Ms. van der Plas and her legal unit regarding the conviction of Babasan and its relationship to the allegations against a high-ranking justice official. You said, and I quote, at the start of your independent research, you wondered if the theory of the law firm was not a nonsense fairy tale story, and you assumed that this level of corruption could never occur in your country, where you had worked so hard against organized crime, close quote. Is it your assessment that this case is an aberration from what is normal in the Netherlands, or is it a sign of a systemic problem with organized crime?
I was shocked.
Put on your, sorry.
I was shocked about what I heard from those two lawyers when they asked me to do some investigation about that. I said it's a fairy tale. I know Holland very well about organized crime, all that kind of thing. Those things doesn't happen in Holland. That was my opinion at that moment. But they asked me, Klaas, please do the investigation. But we believe in the story. And after that, I must say, I think it's true. That the Dutch government are blackmailed in the story of the highest-ranking man of justice.
You mentioned that the National Investigations Unit did only a facts collection investigation, but had no authority to do a proper investigation. What additional options and powers would have been open to an investigator if they had been empowered to open an official investigation, just so we understand the differences? Which witnesses did they not interview as a result of the limited investigation?
I asked the head of that investigation. I gave him all the information. I said, I can give you the people who must do this investigation. I traveled them to Turkey. I've got very good contacts during these days in intelligence service, police, everything. I can introduce them. You can do a very good investigation. He said, no, we do nothing.
Why do you think that's the case?
He said we don't see anything for no facts for a criminal investigation. Then we don't do any criminal investigation. And when there is not a criminal investigation, I can do anything.
But given your extraordinary credibility and the fact that you are a man who has made a difference in meting out justice in Holland, yes. Didn't that add to, the imperative that they do something? I mean, you were presenting something I mean, you set out to disprove. You didn't think it was real. Then you came to. It seems to me that
I pressed him. I said, I've got all the information for you. I can travel with you to Turkey. We can speak to the victims, to the police officers, intelligence officers. And he said, no, I'm not allowed to do that.
Not allowed.
Not allowed.
Under
That's
pain
it.
of being fired or reprimanded in some way, do you think? Or
I don't know.
You don't know.
I don't
Okay. Okay. I'd like to yield to, without objection, to one of our councils on the Helsinki Commission, Alison Hobart. Alison.
Thank you all for being here today. Mr. Langendon, what is the current status of the Babasin case? You did extensive research into evidence tampering with the wiretaps. Has there been any movement in the Dutch government on looking into this case any further to see if there was any miscarriage of justice?
Maybe I will, because there happened something in that case now. Till now, they refused completely to do anything. We asked again and again for investigating because the man was convicted on only telephone tapes. And Mr. Langendon even interviewed in Turkey also a policeman who said, I was helping the Dutch to manipulate those telephone tapes at the time. But they refused till now to do an investigation, but we made a revision request to the Supreme Court of the conviction of Mr. Babasin, and that revision request was done April 2011. And only recently, and we brought in all the evidence we have, and we have a lot, and recently in August 2011, the Attorney General of the Supreme Court said, I require to the Supreme Court that I can do a new investigation into this case because there is so much material, but we want to verify that material. And just recently, the day we left for Washington, that was Monday or Tuesday, I got information from the Supreme Court that they made a quick decision. It was planned on 30th of October, but they made it last Tuesday, and they said the prosecutor the Attorney General of the Supreme Court, by the new law, can do this investigation itself. So I think now that the Attorney General, different than the prosecution office, sees the value of what we have already, and he is now starting an investigation. And we just can hope that this will be a real investigation. He wrote in his conclusion very precisely that he wants to involve the defense very much into this investigation because also he believes in rule of law. But he said, I almost can't believe that this happened in my country, but let's go and investigate it. So this is a new development, but very recent. Actually, last week before we left, yeah. Yeah.
Now, will this be a full investigation or a fact-finding investigation or a completely different type? Because
it is a very special investigation in our criminal law. It is and it is just by new law, 1st of October, made possible. And it is a fact-finding investigation by the highest Attorney General of the Supreme Court into the facts. We brought new facts for the revision. So that will be the telephone tapes, but that will also be the interrogation of a translator who knew everything and who said that this Babasin was a purpose of the Turkish government. So he's going to interview witnesses, and he wants to make a new investigation on the telephone tapes and all the irregularities which you can hear already, but then to investigate it really. So it can take some time, but it will be very interesting. And of course, then you can't walk along Mr. Deming's role anymore either. Yeah.
Ms. Vardaman, you mentioned in your statement that legalized prostitution led to increased demand and thus a need for greater supply in relation to the Netherlands' legalization of prostitution in the year 2000. You also did a study of several other countries at the same time in your 2007 study. Did you also see a similar pattern there, if any of them similarly legalized, or do you have any other examples of legalization leading to greater demand?
The other three countries, Japan, Jamaica, and the United States, do not have legalized prostitution and did not at that time, except for the rare situation in the state of Nevada where several counties still have brothels, legal brothels. And that was really the only thing we could compare to in that research. However, it did play out similarly in our research in Nevada. Las Vegas was one of the cities we focused on, and that definitely was a line of questioning that we had when we went into Las Vegas. And the similar feeling and evidence came out that there was an increase in demand for commercial sexual activity in those places where it is legal. And that included those counties in Nevada where they saw actually people leaving the city of Las Vegas to travel out to the nearest county that does have legalized prostitution for that purpose.
Before we conclude, and I would ask if there's anything else you would like to share with us, I do want to mention that we did invite Ambassador at Large for Human Trafficking, Lucy DeBacca, to be here today. I have called over to the office, as has the staff, several times, specifically on this case, and I have not heard back from them, which is disappointing, because I wrote the law that created that position, both the office and the Ambassador at Large, and no callback. You know, again, whether a country be a great friend in the United States or something less than that, friends don't let friends commit human rights abuses, and if this is an aberration or if this is a pattern, there are real victims, including the very courageous Mr. B, who's right over here, who have suffered and carry those scars, and we need to speak truth to power wherever it is, including our own country here in the United States. So I note that with disappointment that they're not here to be at this table to speak to this very important issue. But we will stay at that. We do, since this is a briefing and not a formal hearing, we do entertain questions. So if there is anyone who would like to raise a question with our very distinguished witnesses, or me, please proceed. Yes. Would you take a... Do
you want to take the microphone at the end of the dais there?
Hello. Hi, my name is Kwame Fosu, and I'm the Policy Director for the Rebecca Project for Human Rights. And thank you for holding this very important hearing. We are very grateful, and thank you for coming, Adele, class, and B. What is the process? We know that the Netherlands has been cited by the United Nations as one of the top 10 tourist destinations. Oh, sorry. One of the top 10 destinations for sex tourism. What is the process of changing their rating from a tier 1 country to a tier 2 or tier 3? What is the actual process? How do we do this? Because it's very important to the Rebecca Project that people like yours, Demick, who actually are in charge of prosecuting human trafficking, do come to justice. And we want to make sure that advocates in the United States are aware of this and know how we can take steps to change the rating. And so we want to know what's
Great question. First of all, as I think many of you know, we established what we called minimum standards in the 2000 Act. We built on those in the 03, the 05, and then the more recent Act, adding to information as to what the backdrop is that we use in our data calls to our embassies in finding out whether or not there are prosecutions, complicity by government officials, how well or poorly the military is doing, are they complicit in trafficking, and it's a very comprehensive look. And as a matter of fact, in 2000, we were focusing on arrests, but we didn't get to the conviction part, and some countries actually gamed the system and did arrests, but they weren't doing anything about jail time. So we changed that in subsequent laws. The process, very simply, after that backdrop, looking at the facts, then applying what's happening on the ground with those standards, the minimum standards as we call them, and they are minimum. They're not maximum, they're minimum, but they're very important, is for the Department of State to make a call based on that information as to whether or not they are Tier 1, Tier 2, watch list, or egregious violators, which would be Tier 3. The process today, the designation of any country can be changed on any day if the data warrants it. It is customarily done after the TIP report is released. There's a section that has all countries ranked, including the United States. But frankly, if information comes forward suggesting that there is reason for a demotion or a change, an improvement, a tier ranking can be changed on any day of the week of any month of the year. So Holland could be changed if the Department of State and the TIP office so desired it today or tomorrow or any other day. But we did, by design, as Congress, did not make tier callings. We felt that it would be best done by each of our embassies feeding into the TIP office itself. And as we all know, there is a political struggle within the Department of State. There are many ambassadors who don't want their country being designated Tier 3. There's a great deal of pushback. I think that's unfortunate. It ought to be all about the Mr. Bs and the victims, because there is a two-part strategy there. First, the designation, and then what do you do with it? There are a number of actions that can be taken in terms of penalties, and hopefully the penalties will be commensurate with the tier rating. But if a country does start to make some real progress, and we've had a number of countries that have done that, great allies like Israel and South Korea were Tier 3 countries. And Israel moved heaven and earth to close brothels and to make sure that women, especially in Tel Aviv, were not being exploited. And in like manner, South Korea passed a number of important laws and policies to mitigate trafficking, particularly sex trafficking, in that country. So, it's all about making the call based on the facts. I have argued for a long time that Holland does not deserve to be on Tier 1 because of the enormously large number of women and boys and young people who are exploited in the 13, as Ms. Vardaman told us, red light districts in that country. And, the line of demarcation between a trafficking victim and a woman who purports to be there on her own volition is very threadbare indeed. There are levels of force, fraud, and coercion that could be easily missed by someone who is inclined to think it's all okay. And added to that, anyone who has not attained the age of 18. So all of these young boys that are being exploited, and young girls, in Amsterdam, and the facility that is still, or the brothel that still has people in it with a different name, is a trafficking crime. Because, one commercial sex act, our definition in the law, and anyone who has not attained the age of 18 is by definition a sex trafficking victim. So I would encourage, even admonish the administration to rethink its Tier 1 designation, but I've done that before and have gotten nowhere. Thank you for the question. Yes, please.
Dr. Cassie Bevan. I used to work in this committee, and for you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to know, given the fact that we don't really have jurisdiction over Holland, and there is no real nexus for us to be able to make much change in another country, how do we enforce, one, how would we keep the Secretary General or anyone else who's an offender out of the United States? And what kind of resolution, what kind of enforcement could we in the United States have as a Congress to be able to keep someone out? And the other is to how can we get Holland and other countries that have voluntarily entered into agreements, such as the Palermo protocols. Why is not, how do you get countries to follow their own agreements that they've agreed to enforce in their own countries? Everybody is saying, your three Ps, your protect, prevent, and prosecute. But, we're not seeing it. And I think it's outrageous that the tip office doesn't respond to the chairman of a committee like this and the author of the bill, who is much esteemed by everyone in this room and in every place. So that's outrageous.
Thank you. Cassie? Is that for me or the others or for all of us? Well, I'll just take a couple. Okay, yeah, please. Zvanopoulos?
To understand well, you say you can have nice regulations, but when something is behind it, like hidden, that even policemen are forced to silence down. That's the point. I think it's very important that that the facts we bring now are included in the conversations, in the estimations, and that's the only thing to do, because you can make rules, but that's what I say. I'm educated in a country where, rule of law and so on, but when you see then the reality and the practice, that can really frustrate. And it's very important, like you as a chairman already said, we have to listen to the victims, but it's also very important in a country like the Netherlands and that's what I saw those last years very clearly, that people working as policemen, really honest policemen, even honest prosecutors, I have them seen in my office, sometimes with tears in their eyes, that they could not go on. They were scared. Some lost their jobs because they didn't want to go on. It's very important that we find a way to support the good people in those systems who want to do something. And when policemen are forced to close their mouths, that we find a way to support them, to help them. And that's a very difficult thing, because what you see is that people shut their mouths and say, okay, Mrs. van der Plas, I know much more, but I'm not going to tell you till I'm retired, because I'm still scared for my profession, for my little house. I have children. This is, at the moment, a mentality in the Netherlands, and that was shocking me. And I think people have to come out, and the people who come out has to be supported. You have to say, okay, when you deny it, here are facts, and what are your facts? So that's why we come here, because there was a bit of discrepancy between that she says, yes, but the Netherlands are doing a lot of effort in new laws and things like that. I don't deny that. I just say what's happening behind the screens that makes, it's like you paint your ceiling white, but the roof still has holes and the water pours in. That's the whole problem. And how do we find a solution for that?
I would add that there's no statute of limitations on rape and exploitation of young children. As I said in my opening, I can't think of a more egregious crime against a human being than rape, and then rape of a child. And we know with the victims that the scars are lifelong, can perhaps never be mitigated, but we need to stand with them, that there's justice for those who commit these crimes. The importance of a hearing like this is to try to bring light and scrutiny, to try to persuade the Dutch government, who is a close ally of the United States, that this is an embarrassment. And if we're wrong, if this information is not correct, if this is some grand conspiracy, for the purpose of which I can't even begin to think why. I mean, before we decided to do this, we did our due diligence on our side. And that doesn't mean we have absolutely everything, but that's why we have asked for an investigation that will go on beyond the cursory. And to have a man of Klaus's status, I should say, a man who made it his business to put criminals away for life, that have committed terrible crimes, brings an enormous amount of credibility, as do you all, and to hear from the victims themselves is numbing. In terms of what we should do, our own tip office should be here. It's not. I will ask again that they engage on this. Maybe they have, and I'd love to see the information. I wanted it before we actually had this briefing. Our appeal is to the government, and I hope that they will respond, and it would indicate, if the Attorney General takes this up, that for their own reasons, because they care about justice. You care about, Holland is a rule of law country. And again, with regards to tiers, as I said before, we did not mince designating our best friends in the world who are at risk. South Korea with the threat in the north. Israel, who is our greatest ally in the Middle East, the only democracy in the Middle East, was on Tier 3 during the Bush administration. And I always applauded that courage to do that. And I would note parenthetically that this bill, and Cassie remembers this because she worked with us to help get it enacted in the first place, was vigorously opposed by the Clinton administration on the record. Harold Koh sat where you sat, who's now Consular of State. They did not want to have the naming of names because it is embarrassing. It complicates all the niceties of statecraft, and they did not want sanctions. My argument is everyone will agree if it's all done in the abstract to combating trafficking, not so when you really do the data calls, you do the hard work and say there are people, victims like, like Mr. B, who that's why we do this law, period. And so naming is important, and I hope the TIP office takes a good look at this and reviews this. Finally, I am the special representative for the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. I do think it is my job in that capacity to raise these issues in the hope that very well-meaning and people committed to the rule of law, which we know the Dutch government has, as you pointed out, Ms. van der Plas, there are these great policemen who are frustrated. Really? Just do it right, and we're trying to form some support for that. Anybody else? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm HP Schijnemachers. I'm Counselor for Justice and Home Affairs at the Netherlands Embassy. Just for the record, I wanted to make one comment, please, if you allow me. And that is that, contrary to the impression that the panel might have given you, the Netherlands takes the fight against child sex trafficking very seriously. And we could have commented if we would have been invited to this panel, but it wasn't until we protested not being included on this one-sided panel that you came back last Monday offering us the opportunity to ask the first question and send in a written statement. Well, since just asking a question or giving a short remark like this one doesn't compensate for the one-sidedness, we declined to do so. We did, however, send in the letters that the Minister of Security and Justice has sent to the Dutch Parliament, and I would refer to them. Thank you.
Ask you, please, if you don't mind. Was there anything you heard today that caused you to rethink that perhaps there is a very credible story here?
I think that I'm not on the panel, so that's not the way to address questions to me. But
it's a give and take. This is not a hearing, and you have the floor, and I'm asking you a very serious question.
And I was in the process of giving you an answer, but I wanted to make that clear first. And that is that the information that has been given today has all been available, and therefore I think it's good that Mrs. van der Plas indicated that she's going to take this, what is now amounting to a public trial, to the Court of Appeals, and I think that's where it belongs. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Anything you'd like to say in sum before we close down?
I would like to thank you very much and your commission. I have a copy of what I said, but we all gave it already, but with the attachment. So it's one copy with this ACT report and the letter of Mrs. Thank you so much for what you do in general. For the Anti-Human Trafficking Act 2001, I was reading it from internet. I could follow everything. It's a very good, tremendous job. And I even also heard Mr. Obama speaking when there was here the United Nations conference that this is a new form of slavery. And thank you very much for this effort, this emphasis you made on this already for so many years, and hearing us here, and that we could bring here the problem we are fighting for so many years already.
Thank you so very much. And I will say that if the Dutch government would like to, we will convene a second hearing and invite you to the witness table We'll work out a date, and I look forward to it. Hearing's adjourned.
Would be marvelous. Yeah.